So thanks to current technology, a single person can do something that in the past would have required an entire team. So we can automate tasks, we can build it into gadgets or software, we can distribute some of the tasks onto the internet. This is generally a very good thing. Except of course that tasks like creating havoc can also be automated. So we're seeing this rising tide of automated terrorism, mainly of course in the form of software, distributed denial of service attacks and so on. So one interesting question is of course, can we stem this tide? Can we find ways of controlling it so we just use automation for good? And at this point philosophers come in very handy, mostly because we immediately ask, wait a minute, what do you mean for good? What is good? And it's actually very tricky to operationalize this. So it's important to figure out those things too, besides the purely technological questions, what we can do with near-term and far future technology. And I think the trend is going to continue. So today we are developing technologies that allow people to automate tasks, which means that what takes months today can be done in weeks and then days in the future. And as things speed up, that means that the rate of change in society, in technology, in what's going to exist around us is going to pick up. Some of that rapid change is just fashion or fads. But a lot of it also means that the overall situation is going to be shifting. Geopolitics is probably going to become more volatile because the new countries can build up an infrastructure much faster than in the past. There's still a lot of material limitations. You can't really easily build a road super fast today, but we're getting tools that make some technologies much faster. So if something can be turned into a gadget or a software application, it can be deployed across the world in hours. Which of course means that if it's a very disruptive technology, that means the world can actually literally be changed in a few hours. I think it's very hard to tell what kind of society we're going to be having in 50 or 100 years, simply because it's so hard to predict the foundational technologies. So there are some technologies that are easy to predict because you get constrained by the laws of physics, and quite a lot of it is a little grind. Engineers make microchip faster, cheaper and better. Then you have the ideas, new pieces of software, ways of solving things, and they are usually the ones that really change the world, like the internet, like social media. And they cannot be predicted in advance. But typically what we're seeing is that we're getting wealthier and wealthier, both from average and in absolute terms. There is going to be more material good stuff around. And I think that trend is unlikely to be broken, even though we're going to be facing some resource and ecological constraints. So I think we can be fairly certain that in 100 years, our descendants or ourselves are going to be fairly well off by our current standards. They might not feel well off though. Just like we today think, oh, I'm just an average Joe, except that we have a lifestyle that a medieval prince would be envious of. So we're developing a lot of things that set our aspirations ever higher, which might actually make us feel like we're not making any progress at all. So automation is not necessarily a threat to jobs, because jobs can move up to a higher level. You work on designing things or managing things or services. The problem might be, of course, that automation spreads so rapidly that a lot of people are out of jobs and they're very bad at actually re-educating themselves and finding new positions. So whether our societies can handle those radical changes is a very open question, especially since our decision-making processes in deciding both as individuals and as a society, and especially as in terms of political leadership, are not very good at handling rapid change. People generally find a way, people are very creative, but it's also hard to actually change rules or institutions because they're built to be slow. They shouldn't be changing with every fad and moral panic. So the problem might be that technology might be moving too fast for a lot of our institutions, so the institutions are going to be flailing around and making policies that make absolutely no sense. I think we're already seeing that in a lot of technology areas, both in terms of the internet and the computing technology, but also perhaps in terms of finance. What's going to happen is, of course, this is going to spread into more and more areas. So maybe the most important technology to innovate in is new ways of organizing people, new forms of institutions. The problem is that kind of innovation, we can't say anything about the physical laws constraining them. They're all based on good ideas. And those ideas we can't predict. It's a bit like Wikipedia. Wikipedia doesn't make sense if you've never seen it before. It's a completely unheard of notion of that people just voluntarily put together information and produce an amazing shared object. If somebody had described it to me back in the early 90s, I would say that's a beautiful dream, but it belongs in some kind of utopian Star Trek future. Humans can't do that. It turns out that we can, and it worked. Except that there are a lot of attempts at making something just as good as Wikipedia and other domains that have completely failed. We don't have a science of inventing these kind of wonderful social solutions. So maybe the future is wiki democracy, whatever that is, but we haven't invented it yet, and it's very hard to predict what it would be like. We can make some guesses though. Societies are constrained by their information storage and information processing capacities. You can't have a representative democracy in a society without literacy, which requires at least printing presses. The ancient Egyptians could have heard about the idea, but they couldn't run a parliament at all, simply because there was not enough scribes to copy the notes about parliament and tell people about it. The internet allows us to do new things. We just haven't figured out what these new things are.